the size of institutional violent forces versus the percent of population that are feeling unrest.
Well, what I'm thinking is I think when you said cultural revolution, that's what we're looking at. Nobody wants to come to blows. We don't want the nukes to launch. China doesn't want to invade. They don't want to trigger some sort of hellfire.
We are back. And yes, we are talking about Tim Pool and the phrase that, quite frankly, he loves to use on his, let's just say he loves to use it when his viewership is down. But don't worry, we'll be asking the question if, number one, if it's possible, and number two, is it just a great big giant grift? And I'm talking about that Civil War phrase he likes to throw around, seeing how it is that we've got one political party once again using the legal system to go after a political opponent. People need to... People might want to think about this, but I've talked about this before on multiple occasions, and I've given you guys my honest thoughts, and I'll continue to give my honest thoughts on this right here. However, I'm going to be adding a little bit more nuance to this take. So the other night, this was, I'll say it was Monday night, that Tim decided to have, let's just say, the usual guest on. He had this guy named JW, and it's not as well known, but then, of course, last night he talked to Conservative Ant, and the same topic came up halfway through the show. Don't worry, I'll probably do a bigger video on all of his takes when it comes to this. And it seems to me that every time this topic gets brought up, something, of course, changes in his actual take. It almost feels like maybe it is, in fact, a grift, and maybe he just does this when his viewership is down to try to get some people to actually watch. But still, at the same time, though, I'm not entirely sure, because if you actually look at the possibility of it occurring, it is possible. While it is not actually likely, it is possible. So this right here is in response to a poll that the Post Millennial got a hold of. That's it was a University of Chicago poll. 3,500 people were polled, and roughly 30% basically said that they would be okay with the justification of violence, whether it would be to keep Donald Trump out of office or to put Donald Trump in office. However, the numbers, of course, are for the most part skewed. Now, with that right there being saying, let's go ahead and dive into this. Now, this first clip I'm going to play you guys is actually in response to the poll itself. It's got some length to it, right around 1 minute and 30 seconds, close to 2 minutes, somewhere in that time frame. Make sure you guys pay attention to it all the way through. I'm going to give you guys my thoughts on the other side and tell you exactly what to expect from this and why it is that some people may be radicalized and what I personally believe the real number is. Let's go ahead and roll this.
It's a lot bigger question. Would you fight? You know, adding the danger part of it is like, well, if I'm in danger, I'm going to be a lot more likely to fight for my life.
So here's how it should actually break down. If this was framed that way and it's skewed liberal in their survey questions, that means that of that 11.6, there's a massive bias. So the number is probably much less among both groups. In fact, you could argue if it was left biased, then the political violence to support Trump would be a lot lower. You ask a liberal, do you think violence should be used to put Trump in office? They say no. Do you think violence should be used to stop Trump? They say yes. If you poll 2,000 Democrats and 1,000 Republicans, you will get the numbers you're looking for. That's the important thing to track with these studies. But here's what I want to get to. I don't know if this is true. All right, it may be. 1 in 5 Americans believe that the election is stolen. These polls are not always accurate. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. Some of the, but what have they been off by? Like 7 to 10%? Let's just say the number is 7 to 10%. Let's track all of the polling that we've seen thus far in the past 2 elections from, let's just take a look at 2020 and 2022, the presidential and then the midterms. The polling, actually 2016. Let's look at from 2016 till now. The polling has been consistently off by between 7 or 10%. So that means we're looking at 20 million people in this country would hold those sentiments if the polling was off by that much. And it could be in the other direction. It could even be higher. It could be 40 million people who believe in the use of force and violence.
But when it comes to plaintively telling humans how many people want to fight to kill right now, we should be very specific about who claimed that. Like, it was only 3,500 people that made those claims. So I do not want to extrapolate.
It was 360
people of 3,500 people polled. So it was very, 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 very tiny.
And now considering that, and considering the polls have been wrong by about 7 to 10% in favor of Trump, I think it stands to reason that the number is probably a bit less than 30 million. And we can argue that the 11.6% number is probably, if we were to drop it down, it's probably closer to 9%.
And
that's a high removal, because I was saying just 10%, but that's nearly 20% being removed from that number,
and people
from 11 to 9. But so that then we'd be looking at what, 15 to 20 million people who want to engage in violence.
Except that a lot of people that answer polls to begin with are people that are politically activated. And those are the people that would be more likely to, in a situation, take up arms, I think, are people who are already aware of what's going on.
Let's say the amount of people that want to engage in, that are willing to engage in violence is 5 million. Let's say it's 2.5 million. Or three. Let's just say 1/10 of what they actually got.
1/10 of 1%.
3 million people. I think when you look at the Summer of Love, it's clear to see that there are millions of people prepared to engage.
As you guys can see, the number is obviously a little bit bigger on one side than it is the other. And don't worry, there's more here to actually respond to. And I'll probably even create a video later on in the week for last night, because obviously the topic got brought up again. So let's go ahead and dive into this. So the numbers of people who are saying that it's okay to use violence to keep Donald Trump out of office, for the most part, are probably in America's largest cities. I would say New York, Chicago, Los Angeles primarily. And you would probably think that these people are in fact crackpot loons. I've heard a lot of people online talk about going to war with people on the right side of the right side of politics, that they're being conservatives. And it goes back to, I think, something that What If Altruist had said in a video in which I think he brought up Jimmy Fallon, that one side is basically bringing swords into conflict and the other side is bringing rifles. Now, I'll talk more about that towards the end of the video, but let me go ahead and say this. I have been of the mindset, and just based off what I've seen, and I've done videos on this before, most of them on Gear Issue 33. I'll try to link the videos in the description box that I did in response to Jon Marks' video, which, by the way, looking back on it, probably was not the best response video in the world, because a lot of points were made to me that quite frankly, I missed. But I've always maintained that if something was to happen, it would not be red on blue. It would, for the most part, be blue on blue. It would be very, very dark blue versus very, very light blue, and it would happen in America's cities. And it could possibly spoil over to suburbs, but would it actually show up to small town America? Now, I know somebody's going to bring up the race riot that occurred. Well, not a race riot, but it was more along the lines of a race brawl, a fight that happened in Montgomery, Alabama. People, of course, were online saying, yeah, we tried that in a small town. The problem is they don't seem to understand that Montgomery, Alabama is actually a pretty large city. The whole small town moniker is typically designed for towns that have less than 50,000 people in them. So, nice try. But people obviously love to bring this up, and people love to mention the fact that it could, in fact, happen. We're going to show up to your small town, and we're going to absolutely destroy you. We're going to absolutely just blow you guys away like you're absolutely nothing. We're going to ransack the place. And my mindset has always been, okay, you might want to get your own crap squared away in these larger cities before you decide to try anything in rural areas, because it's not going to end well for you. By the way, YouTube, that was not a threat. I already know you're going to be looking to yellow dollar sign this video, because you guys love to do that. But the thing is this right here. Yeah, if it was ever to occur, it would probably occur as a result of identity politics. Think about it this way here. And by the way, I'm still trying to get around to that particular project that I'm trying to work on about identity politics itself. Think about it this way here. The Democratic Party loves to go after single-issue voters. So this is what they do. They pander to those who are black. So why do they do that? Well, more government benefits, because obviously you've got a lot more single mothers. There's obviously going to be a lot more entitlements thrown out there. It seems to me that one side of that equation started to wake up and realize that we can't rely on the government anymore. Hence, that right there being mostly black males. That's something you might want to pay attention to going into 2024. We pander to Hispanics, or they pander to Hispanics, basically on the notion that yes, immigration status, all that type of stuff. There, white men, quite frankly, racist. This same thing with blacks. Okay, when it comes to the LGBTQ crowd, they love to look at it this way here. We got to pander to the L's, we got to pander to the G's, we got to pander to the B's, we got to pander to the T's, we got to pander to all this other type of crazy stuff. And now you guys are seeing that some of those people are, quite frankly, are turning on one another. I did, in fact, say that there was going to happen. Basically, the idea is to create a rainbow coalition, which is exactly what Jesse Jackson wanted to do in the 1970s. It seems like his dream may have actually came true, but also something else, too. As Glenn Beck said, it would not last because of the clashes in ideology and the clashes in what these people want. That is actually what we are seeing. It's actually breaking apart at the seams as we speak. There's a lot of commentators online that are getting hundreds of thousands of views. Most of them, of course, are gay. They're calling out the trans community because they think that the trans community has hijacked the entire movement. The other day when I did my video on Anna Kasparian exposing Vosh, believe it or not, I actually agreed with what Vosh was saying. It just seemed funny to me that Anna Kasparian was actually exposing him for the BS and some of his previous takes. The thing is this right here. That group over there, for the most part, resides in quote-unquote cities. Now, how many of them are radicalized? Well, that comes up in this next clip.
University of Chicago study. The U Chicago professor said the public is more radicalized, and that's really quite significant. Okay, but well, before we opine on this, let me read and break this down because we got to be careful here. They say the study found that 11.6% of U.S. adults agree that a use of force is permissible to prevent Donald Trump from becoming president. This amounts to around 30 million people. But hold on there. A total of 3,543 U.S. adults were polled for the survey in June of 2023, with a reported margin of error of 2 to 3 percentage points. University of Chicago professor Robert Pape, who led the research, said that while he believes recent indictments against President Trump have created radicalization, there is also growing anger and radicalization on the left as well. Oh, gee, you think? The public is more radicalized than it was in April, and it's really quite significant. We've been tracking this quite a while, and this is really a big bump. What Pape did not mention is that the number of people who would approve of violence when it serves a desired political outcome on the left dwarfs that of the right. In the same study, it was determined that the amount of Americans who say the use of force is justified to return Trump to the White House has shot up from 6 million in the past few months to about 18 million. It's almost half the amount of people who justify using violence to keep Trump out of office. So right now, when it comes to radicalization, I don't know if this actually means 30 million Americans. It translates to perhaps.
No.
These studies are done in such a way that they have successfully, in many instances, extrapolated data to a great degree. The only question is margin of error. They say 2 to 3%. Maybe it's 5 to 10, 10 to 20. Let's say the margin of error is 10 to 20%. You think that would be fair, Ian?
It's tough to tell. It's impossible to tell. That's the problem with this article, and it's disgusting that they wrote that headline. That
Why?
is complete mislead because they only polled 3,500 people.
But do you know how polls work?
Yeah.
How do they work?
You get a small group of people, and then you ask them a question or a group of questions, and then you can do whatever you want with
So
that
the way
data.
it works is they have charts tracking various demographics. They poll the demographics in key areas. They figure out what the majority of these areas think and feel. Then they do a wider sample size. Then they do a wider sample size with different questions and say, if the Cast Castle household, 100% of this house, everyone polled in it said they would not vote for Joe Biden. Some might vote Libertarian, some might vote Trump, but 0 for Biden. When they do a larger poll and they say, we called this house and we were told that they don't think violence is justified, they extrapolate that with a margin of error to say previous polls in the area based on demographic views and studies have shown that this group tends to vote this way. When we asked them, they said this. They then target a bunch of different areas and say, this 3,500 people is actually a very large sample size for a poll. I think it's fair to say, however, the margin of error could be way larger, and to just immediately say 30 million Americans say, no, we've extrapolated that data point. But it does suggest, a study suggests 30 million Americans believe violence is justified. It doesn't mean they will commit the violence, however, just that someone else could.
I think
Yeah, if they were put on a jury, they would be like, oh, we sympathize with what you did.
Either way, I think it is absolutely fair to say this is patently obvious when you talk to these people and when you see people go and do men on the street interviews with them. They absolutely agree with this in major cities.
Oh, in a lot of places, definitely. I just think that they should have done it by percentage, like this percentage of people versus 30 million, because that makes it sound like there's exactly 30 million out here that are ready to go to war.
I chose to put those two clips back to back. It's actually two separate clips. I decided to do that for a reason, because obviously the notion is going to continue to be clamped down on this network, on his actual channel. As I mentioned earlier in this video, he did speak about it again last night with his guest conservative aunt. And of course, the topic does in fact come up a lot on his channel. So the question is he correct? Well, he did have a guy on his channel back 2 or 3 years ago who stated that if it ever occurred, it would more than likely occur in the cities themselves. And what you would see happen is that you would see factions. It sounds kind of familiar. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this or not, but the Last of Us video game series. Of course, many people have wondered with the first one, after the cordyceps outbreak occurs, what exactly happened to the rest of the country? Many people have wondered that, and I quite frankly have thought about exploring that in this and on this channel, especially as I begin to make the shift into more video essay type content to try to use it as a paradigm or try to use it as a comparison to other events. Another series, or me personally, the one that I believe would more than likely occur is something more akin to Batman's No Man's Land. the major cities in the country, they would get cut off from the mainland. Of course, this would involve food shortages, all kinds of crap. The situation would get out of control inside cities. And of course, people would just stop traveling to there. And then eventually truckers would strike and say, we're not going to these areas because of great big giant war zones. And next thing you know, the cities themselves would in fact turn into complete total war zones. And they would be bigger crap holes than what they are today. And how would that actually occur? Well, it would occur more likely due to identity politics. You see, you have a lot of woke prosecutors, a lot of woke DAs in these very large cities who, quite frankly, don't enforce the rules. They don't exactly arrest people, or if they do arrest people, they let them go after a day in jail. You've got murderers out there on the street. You've got people who commit the word that, quite frankly, we're not allowed to say on this platform. They go free. People who perform assaults, they go free. Things like that there in these very, very large cities. We see it every single day. The question is, at what point in time will people in those cities begin to fight back? Which, by the way, is also the topic of another project that I plan on doing in 2024 when we fully transition into video essays, is that I think the very next stage that we get when it comes to this situation of crime is what I would like to call the Death Wish stage. The Death Wish. Yes, if you've ever watched the Death Wish movies, not the one with Bruce Willis, even though I actually thought it was pretty good. It was a pretty good remake. If you ever watched or at least the first one, I think is the most prophetic, the original one with Charles Bronson, what happens is that a man's family gets, his wife gets killed, his daughter gets put into a vegetative state because some guys went inside their apartment, sexually assaulted, I have to say it like that, his wife and his daughter, and ended up killing his daughter. And the second one, they killed his... I want to say it was his housekeeper, and they took his daughter, he kidnapped his daughter, and then she, after having the act performed on her, would eventually commit self-deletion. You can't say that word on the platform either. Well, the thing is this right here. Kersey would eventually not so much go on a bit of a rampage. With the second one he did, but on the first one, he realized he needed to defend himself against would-be criminals. So he got into it with a couple of them. He put them down. He had a friend of his, of course, gift him a gun. After a while, he became a vigilante, and he started to seek these people out. It almost makes you think that maybe we're headed more towards that stage than we are headed towards the CW stage. I actually think a lot more things could happen in the next few years. What if Donald Trump, after being indicted 4 times, and I personally don't think that the 3 cases outside the recent one are going to end up with a prison, but I do think that the overall final verdict will be, like Robert Barnes said, will be sometime after the election in 2024, after the Florida case continues to get, continued. And it's going to be continued at least twice based upon the schedule they have down there. So the question is this right here. Does the country then immediately devolve into civil war? No, it doesn't. Most conservative voters are at work. They work day jobs. And, of course, now if they're put in a position where they've got nothing to do, I highly doubt that it would actually occur overnight. You had this incident that happened with this 75-year-old man where the FBI showed up to get this guy over a social media post. They're claiming he pulled out a .357 Magnum on them, which, by the way, I've never really given you guys my thoughts on that. But a 75-year-old man with a firearm going up against a bunch of FBI agents doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But then again, at the same time, though, we don't really know. We need to wait for the full report to come out. I can already hear somebody saying, well, it's already out. It's been out for a while. Yeah. And the report's already been changed twice. Let's go ahead and get the full final version of that report before we decide to respond to it. Which goes back to 2008 when Barack Obama was running for president. Then he ran for it again in 2012 when he basically said we needed to create a great big giant civilian police force. Makes you think that possibly the Gestapo could be getting created here in the United States in some funny way. But then again, at the same time, we may explore that at a different date. Fact of the matter is this here. These people are now in charge of the culture. They're now in charge of, they're going out of their way to take full charge of, well, they've always been in charge of Hollywood. But social justice, warrior messaging, all that type of stuff. I think what happens is that people just ultimately cut it off. It may be a little bit more what Ian Crossland said at the very, very beginning. It's more of a culture revolution than it is an actual revolution or a cold civil war or a hot civil war. However, what I can see is I can see people completely disengaging altogether. What I mean by this is that if you are a conservative who lives in a state like, say, New York. By the way, if you go to New York State, if you're beyond the city, you'll see a lot of Trump signs, all right? It's the same thing in a place like New Jersey. Outside of Newark, outside of the biggest cities like Trenton, you'll see a lot of Trump signs, a lot of conservatives. Fact of the matter is that conservatives, for the most part, don't live in big cities. And, of course, the hard or very, very dark blue section of the Democratic Party believes that the light blue section of the Democratic Party is, in fact, right-wing. When in reality, they're not. They're just good old-fashioned moderates who typically tend to vote Democrat for a certain reason. If anything was to occur, it would probably occur in those areas. However, who actually wins? Well, a lot of union Democrats are working class. They typically tend to be a little bit more socially conservative, but they typically tend to vote Democrat for the sole purpose of it's what the union wants. And of course, Trump is trying to pivot his way to the union vote in this next upcoming election cycle, which, by the way, could very well pay off for him. More than likely, it actually will. But the thing is this right here. Those union workers, regardless of how they vote, they're not exactly what we call, this right here typically tends to be the pro-Second Amendment side of the Democratic Party. These people right here are not afraid to shoot somebody who tries to rob them. They're not afraid to do that. And they typically tend to live not in suburbs, but they typically tend to live in a small town outside the big town and travel in town. In some cases, they even live in the city. More than likely, if anything, those people right there will just simply leave the cities, meaning that the cities will be left to being just good old-fashioned left-wing hellscapes. It'll be the cops versus the left-wingers. And the military, of course, could get involved, especially the National Guard. I did do a story the other day where D.C. residents or areas that people who live in a small, very, very bad neighborhood in Washington, D.C. are now asking for the National Guard to step in. So the truth be told is, more than likely, you will never, ever see a civil war between the right and the left. If anything, if you had a civil war, it would be between the left and the left. Most conservative voters, of course, have too much time, do not have enough time on their hands to actually start something. Yes, we're for the most part armed. Yes, for the most part, we're working the job. But we also have a different temperament level. I'll put it this way here. It was Jesse Waters. This was back in the days, long before Fox News decided to become what it is today. Jesse Waters made the point on the 5 one night where he said that he was under the impression from what he seen. And by the way, Jesse Waters is from Philadelphia. He's from a city. He's one of the very, very few exception conservatives that's actually very, very conservative that came from a city. And he said that basically what happens is that when conservatives, and this also includes union workers, typically tend to vote Democrat, like I said, are not socially liberal. Typically what happens is that when life gets them down, they typically tend to take a shot of liquor and continue to move on. Libs, on the other hand, have to actually go and actually seek therapy, and then they have to act it out on the street through all kinds of god-awful stuff. Very, very degenerate behavior. These people don't have what we call the skin for anything like this. Yes, there's a section of people in there that are radicalized. Yes, there are a section of people in there who actually want violence. But the problem is this here. Do they have the actual full-on capability for it? And let me go ahead and end this video on this note right here. Do you guys remember Chaz Chop? I'm showing you guys some videos. It's a piece of video. By the way, this right here, credit to Short Fat Otaku, is the channel Demonetized, which I believe is like his demonetized content. I'm not entirely sure what it is. But you guys see it. These people could not actually plant a garden. These people ended up turning on themselves. It would end up being taken control of by a SoundCloud rapper. I don't see how these people have the capacity to do anything more than a beer fart in a whirlwind. That's all I'm saying to you. However, I could see a situation where one section would actually hijack the others and eventually cause an actual stink, and the entire thing could completely go to crap. Maybe this is the reason why it is that people want the police departments defunded. I mean, it seems to me more and more you look at BLM, it seems to me like an organization that was actually controlled. I mean, do you guys remember what Patrice Cullors said? She said, "We are trained Marxists." Then, of course, she took the money and eventually went out of her way to go buy mansions. Doesn't sound to me like an actual Marxist. Sounds to me like she's a trained Marxist. The exact same way I think that Bernie Sanders was also co-opted because he was a natural Marxist. Then, of course, he would eventually become a cuck. I told the left-wingers a long time ago that he would eventually bow down and suck the teat of the Democratic Party and the establishment. And, of course, he did. Fact of the matter is this right here. If something was to occur, I need you guys to go ahead and understand that the best thing you could do is stay cool, stay calm, stay collected, because more than likely, it's just going to be in the cities, and more than likely, it will not last. With that right there being said, guys, John Claymore here. If you guys like this content, please hit the like button, subscribe, share the video, sign off in the comment section. This right here is the only video that is planned for the day. I did have a second video planned, but it was going to be on Reagan and why is that he is so liked. But I need to go back in time and do a little bit more research. There's a few things missing, and I want to make that video very good, so it'll probably be a video essay that will probably come out in a couple of weeks or so, probably sometime after the death of Disney one, so make sure you guys stick around for that. Once again, make sure you guys hit that thumbs up button. Also, share the video. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. Let's make the channel a lot bigger and much larger. Also, hit the notifications bell. There will be a bit of a follow-up to this matter because he was talking about it last night again. So we will pay very, very close attention to this issue. Please leave a comment. Please share the video, and I will see you guys later.